Hello everyone, welcome to this video on how to embed a dashboard in React with Go app. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create, configure, and run an application from scratch using Visual Studio Code. This integration provides a seamless experience for accessing your data and gaining insights in real time. It helps manage data and visualizations in a centralized environment, simplifying data handling, reducing the complexity of analysis, and improving business performance. I've provided a link to the documentation which includes a sample application. Let's get started. I've already installed Node.js and the Go installer on my machine to create a React with Go application using Visual Studio Code. I create a folder for the application and navigate to it. Within it, I create a folder named Go. This will handle the embed config.json file. Then, I run this command to create the application. This creates a new folder with a basic project containing all the necessary files and dependencies to start building the React application. Next, I need to add an embed config.json file to configure embedding parameters, authentication, user context, and customization for the secure embedding of a dashboard. In the dashboard server, click Settings, select Embed, and click Enable Embed Authentication. Then click Download. A dialog box will open. Select the Sales category in Sales Analysis Dashboard. Next, download the JSON file and add it to the Go folder. I open the application root folder in Visual Studio Code. I open the Go folder and create a file named main.go. In it, I add the Go code import standard libraries needed for handling cryptography, encoding, HTTP server functionality, logging, and system operations to build a secure backend API that works with a React frontend. Then, I define a dynamic config map and a structured data model used to pass dashboard embedding settings from the backend to the React frontend. I add the main function that starts an HTTP server on port 8086 with routes for authorization server and get server details. Then, I add the get server details function, which reads the dashboard config from a JSON file, extracts specific fields, and returns them as a JSON response to the client. I add the authorization server function, which processes a POST request to generate a signed embed authorization URL using provided query parameters and config, then fetches and returns the authorization response from the dashboard server. I add the getSignatureURL function, which generates a base 64 encoded HMAC SHA-256 signature for the given query string using the embed secret from the config. Lastly, I add the unmarshal function, which decodes a JSON string into a generic interface while preserving number formats using useNumber. Next, I open the SRC folder in React App folder. I create a folder named Dashboard. In it, I create a file called dashboard.js. This will help define the mandatory properties and implement the methods renderDashboard to render the dashboard, render to create the DOM elements, and component didMount to contact the server. I add imports, global styles, the React library, and the Bold BI embedding SDK to enable dashboard embedding functionality. Then, I define the URL of the Go backend authorization server endpoint used by the Bold BI embedding SDK to obtain authorization. I add the dashboard class component, which initializes the state token and creates a new Bold BI instance to manage embedded dashboards. Then, I add the render dashboard function, which initializes and loads a Bold BI embedded dashboard using the provided configuration and authorization server URL. I add the render function to return the JSX structure containing a container div for displaying the embedded Bold BI dashboard. I add the component didMount function, which fetches the embedding configuration from the backend and renders the bold BI dashboard, handling errors if the config file is missing. Next, I open the app.js file. I replace the code by adding the necessary module import codes to define the app component. Then, I add the dashboard rendering component and export it for use in other files. Next, I open the index.js file. I copy the code from the documentation and replace it here. This imports the necessary modules, React, and create root. They also import the app component and use create root render to render the app component into the specific HTML element. I open the package.json file. I copy the package's listed dependencies from the documentation and replace them here. This defines the React application's metadata. Now everything is ready to render the dashboard. I open the Go application root folder and run this command. This activates the Go installer and provides a listening port. Note, do not shut it down or close. The React application depends on it to render the dashboard. Next, I open my React app root folder and run npm install to download the necessary dependencies and packages for the application. Then, I run this command to build and run the application. On successful compilation, you'll see the sales analysis dashboard rendered automatically in your default browser. If you want to open the dashboard in design mode, change from view mode to design mode and load dashboard to load designer in the dashboard.js. You'll see the dashboard load in design mode. In this video, I've shown you how to embed a dashboard in React with Go application in Bold BI. If you found this video helpful, click the like button and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching.